And welcome back to another episode of TWiP Weddings. Once again, my name is Bruce Clark, and we've got him back. He's back in the fold, Mr. Brian Caparici. Welcome,
Hello,
sir.
hello. Yes, it's great to be back. It's been a while. It's been I was on a hiatus for a little bit there, but I'm back and running
for good
full
reason,
steam ahead. For good reason,
For
yes.
good reason,
We
yes.
had our son 3.5 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
So, thank you. Took a bit of a paternity leave, and hey, I say, like, that's the whole point of being in business for yourself, right? Is that you can do those kinds of things for yourself and for your family. So
yeah.
I don't regret it.
Absolutely. So glad to have you back. We've missed you. So
it's great to be back.
Now we've got you back, but we're missing Robert this week, unfortunately.
Right.
So Robert had his computer went down that he uses in his bat cave to record the show. His computer went down, so he was unable to join us this week, but he's hopefully got a new computer on order and will be back with us on the next show. But
Perfect.
So this week we're going to talk about, it's a little bit of a heavy topic, I guess, but we're going to talk about succession planning and just things that wedding or really any photographers should be doing to kind of safeguard their businesses in the event something ever happens to them and they're unable to run it for even a short period of time or a longer period of time. How can it kind of continue on and keep running? So, but before we get into that topic, we want to remind you, you've got a couple of different ways that you can participate in the show. We've got our website, of course, thisweekinphoto.com. There you'll find our show and all the other great shows that are on the TWiP network. You can leave your comments on the show notes. And of course, we leave all the links to everything we talk about there in the show notes. So if you're looking for stuff we talk about, like our picks of the week and things like that, you can just head over to the website. That's where you'll find those. If you do have a question or a suggestion for a topic for a future episode, there's a couple of ways you can interact. You can send us an email, twipwed@thisweekinphoto.com. Or if you go to the thisweekinphoto.com website and just click on the contact form, you can actually choose the show that you want to interact with and put in your message there, and it'll come right into us and we'll get your message. So feel free to share that with us if you want to let us know, a topic you'd like us to cover, or you have a question for us. And of course, if you are on the social medias, we're kind of on, we're on Instagram. You can follow us there at TWiPwed. Or just add the hashtag TWiPwed to your posts, and we'll keep an eye out for those. And our Facebook group is a really awesome place. We got more people joining every week, lots of discussion happening there. So just head on over and join our Facebook group. So there's lots of ways you can get in touch with us.
Lots of ways, get in touch.
Yeah, we love to hear from our audience. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So like I said off the top, I thought this week would be interesting, and the sort of the motivation for this topic came. I was just recently at Canada Photo Convention, and I had the opportunity to listen to Tim King speak. And one of the things that Tim was talking about was sort of an unfortunate tragedy that had happened to a friend of his who happened to be somebody that he met at Canada Photo Convention, and he became kind of his second shooter, a little bit of his right-hand man, but he also ran his own photography business, and he had a really tragic accident. He was out just skateboarding, fell off his skateboard and cracked his skull, and he passed away, unfortunately. So it got me to thinking, about succession planning. And, a lot of us are solo entrepreneurs, who run our own businesses and a lot of times by ourselves. So what if something happened to you tomorrow that prevented you from being able to run your business? Do you have a plan in place for someone else to run your business while you're unable to? What would happen to your clients? So I thought it would be an interesting topic for us to kind of dig in. And, I haven't done it a lot myself, but I thought it would be good to plant the seeds even to get people thinking about it and, get it front of mind. So
yeah, for sure.
So Brian, maybe let's tackle it from your side of things. Do you have a succession plan? Is it something you've kind of thought about in the event that something were to happen to you? Or let's say in the case you have a baby and you have to take some time away from your business, do you have a succession plan and somebody to kind of run the ship if you were unable to for a while?
Yes, yeah, for sure. And I think I do. Actually, if any of our listeners also listen to my podcast, the Spreading Photographer podcast, they'll know Rob Knoll, who is one of the co-hosts on the podcast. He's also a partner here at Sprout. Him and I sort of have a mutual agreement together that we are sort of each other's backup if anything ever happened to either of us, that we needed to sort of get in and run the ship for a little bit.
Yeah.
So we've had that conversation, which again is like a kind of uncomfortable, weird conversation to have. It's like, if I pass away, will you kind of take the ropes a little bit, right? But
Yep.
it's something that's really important. And I think like what this all comes down to, in my opinion anyways, is oftentimes we get, I mean, obviously we're all tied to our own business, right? Like Brian Caparici Photography is Brian Caparici. But I think so often we become so dependent on our own ability to do things that it ends up hindering us when we want to take a vacation, when we want to take time off, if something ever were to happen, if we were to get hospitalized, if we were to get sick or get injured or anything like that. If everything you do in your business, if the whole machine, if the churn of your business is exclusively dependent on you as the business owner, I think you're probably setting yourself up not only for a potential disaster if something critical goes wrong, but you're also not setting yourself up for a very balanced lifestyle. If you want evenings off or weekends off or a vacation or a couple weeks off, or if you, whatever it is, I mean, you're not really setting yourself up for success in that area. So I think, in my opinion, this kind of brings it to a bit of a bigger discussion where it's like, why are we so dependent exclusively on ourselves? I think we should be setting ourselves up with better systems in our business, outsourcing certain things, having contractors, relying on other people to help us do things, automating certain things, using processes so that the machine can keep running even without us constantly feeding it fire.
Right. So what would be an example of something that you've in your own business that kind of where you were responsible for it, where you were kind of the one doing it, that you were able to kind of outsource or systematize in some way so that you could go, put your feet up for a couple of weeks on a beach somewhere and things would sort of continue. Can you give me an example of
sure, yeah,
just an element of your business?
I remember probably I got married in 2011. At that point, I had run my business for about 6 years, and it was just myself, right? So I was just crushing things. I was super busy. I use the word busy very sparingly, but I was very busy. I was overrun. I was burnt out, and I was at the place where if you were to ask me this question back then, I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, there's no way I'm going to be able to take time off. It just couldn't happen." I hired a studio manager, so I hired an employee full time, 40 hours a week, who came in and basically, they weren't to come in and do more shooting or to do, produce any more business, but more so to help me maintain things. And I remember almost immediately I was able to see the results of that once I got her up to speed and trained and on board with sort of the system of running the studio. And then I remember probably 3 months or 4 months after that, I was at a Professional Photographers of Canada meeting. And I was talking to a few other photographers and I said, yeah, like everything was great. I've been doing all these things. I went on vacation here. I did this. I haven't worked past 4 o'clock in like a couple of months, and I remember one of the photographers saying, hang on, so you're running this like really successful, very busy photography business, yet you haven't worked a day past 4 o'clock in a couple of months. How is that even possible? And I just said, well, it's because I've set up the systems and because I have now support in my business to be able to do that.
Right.
So I guess for me, I mean, I'm not saying that hiring an employee is the answer for everybody, but certainly a lot of the times that might be the solution. If you just can't handle the workload and everything that comes with running a business by yourself at some point, although that person may not justify more sales or more business, they will help you run a more managed business so that you can potentially take some time off or step back a little bit, or you can focus your time in other areas that are, better used for that.
Yeah. And did you find when you brought that person on board, it almost forced you to really learn and refine and hone your own systems as well? Because in order to teach somebody that you kind of had, I find that like when I teach anything, whether I'm teaching flash or lighting or whatever, in the process of teaching it, I learned things about my own, you probably learned things about your own system, or you probably found gaps or holes or things and said, oh, I don't really know actually how that works. I better figure that out so that I can pass it on to the next person, right?
Yeah, that's actually such an interesting point, because so often if we're always the one doing something, right, whether it's editing or emailing or mailing things or packaging a print or whatever it is in our business, if we're always the one doing it, we probably just do it on autopilot and just do it with the assumption that that's how it gets done. But then as soon as you have to show someone that, it almost makes you think about what you're doing. And it's like, oh, do I do that bow the same way every time, or do I not? Or do I kind of waste time thinking of what I should be sending in this email? Or do I actually have email templates that I can just be using to send out every single time? So it does, you're right. It forces you to think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And maybe that's actually a good process, like for photographers that are listening, whether or not you want to hire employees, maybe you should document your entire process of everything you do in your business now as if you were having to teach it to a studio manager, because A, it forces you to think about it. You can be more critical about your own processes, so you'll probably optimize it. But then in doing so, you now have a documentation of it. So if anything ever happened, you've got it documented to say, when someone inquires, here's what happens. When an album comes in, here's what happens. When a wedding is done, here's what happens.
Yeah, I think that would be an excellent exercise for any photographer to sit down and do. And even if you don't have an assistant or hire somebody to do it, like you say, it's going to help you even evaluate it. It might be almost like a systems process audit, where you go through and sit down and review, like, why are some of these things maybe are taking you a lot longer than they need to take you?
Yeah.
Are there ways that we can improve our efficiencies in certain areas? And you might even find, just by going through and doing that exercise, that you find some time, you find some ways to maximize your efficiency, cut down on some steps. Maybe there's things that are taking you longer than they need to do. Right. Like maybe you look at your packaging as an example, and maybe that takes you a long time because, like, I know I suck at wrapping or tying bows. I know my lab offers boutique packaging for an extra $bucks. They can do the packaging for it. Right. Maybe that's a step that you get them to do it instead of you doing it, or something like that. It's just an example off top of my head.
No, I think it's so true. And I'm just now thinking of another quick example that I've been teaching pricing to photographers for probably 6 years now. And every single time when I teach pricing, part of the lecture of teaching pricing is to say, let's look at what goes into any number of your product lines, or a singular, item in your product line, whether it's a print or a session or an album or whatever. And part of that process that I teach and recommend to photographers is to document what goes into it. So you can actually say, this is what goes into producing this product or service, right? Like oftentimes I might say to a photographer, well, what goes into an album for you? And they'd be like, I can design it in about 2 hours. So, roughly 2 hours, the cost of the album, and off we go. But then when I say, well, let's document everything. How long does it take to find the images, to retouch them, to design it, to go back and forth with revisions, to review the album at the end, to order it from the lab, to review it once it comes in, to meet with the client when they want to come pick it up, all those kinds of things. 2 hours just turned into 12 hours.
Right. Yeah.
And just the process of being critical and writing it down made them realize, oh yeah. So maybe that's a good exercise to recommend.
Yeah, and what software are you using to to do the proofing? Are you doing proofing in person, or are you putting it online? And then if you're putting it online, are you paying for that service? What does that service cost a year? Divide that by the number of albums you do in a year. So there's all those little things kind of that you maybe forget about because they just become routine and part. Again, like you do them on autopilot and you kind of forget them, but they can be an important part, right?
Yeah.
And if you miss that step, the whole house of cards could come down as well, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Documenting that and having a good system in place. So have you ever run into a situation, or have you heard of a situation kind of where you weren't able to even photograph a wedding? Now, we're not talking long term, but even just a short term thing where you weren't able to shoot a wedding, or you knew something was coming up you weren't going to be able to do because of a life event, whether it's something that happened to you or a family event or something like that.
Yeah, it's never happened to me personally, but certainly I have the support and infrastructure set up that if it did, I would have a solution. But I do know someone locally, actually Rob, the one I mentioned earlier, ended up filling in for someone locally, a mutual friend of ours who this photographer was supposed to be photographing a wedding on the Saturday, and on the Friday he woke up with like the worst pain ever in his stomach, and he went to the doctors, the emergency room, and they basically said, like, we need to get you in right now for emergency surgery. I think it was his kidney had imploded or some weird thing, like some really bad thing that was like, this cannot wait. You're going in under the knife right now. And the doctor basically said, like, you're gonna be bedridden for a couple weeks. And then the photographer was like, I have a wedding tomorrow. And he's like, you're not shooting it. So this photographer called Rob and said, oh my gosh, like, I'm in the hospital, I'm about to go into surgery, here's what's going on, can you figure something out? At the time, Rob was actually the president of Professional Photographers of Canada, Ontario. So basically this photographer had called Rob to say, hey, I'm part of this association, here's what's going on, can you either cover this? If not, can you help me get this covered? That's what I need help with. And that's part of sort of the benefit of being part of a professional association, that you have that kind of support and infrastructure and community. And Rob ended up photographing the wedding the next day for him, obviously saved his butt. They had to explain it to the clients, and the clients, I believe, got some kind of discount back because it wasn't the original photographer, but at least the client had a photographer at their wedding, right?
Right. They weren't left hanging without anybody showing up. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I mean, it hasn't happened to me, but I've heard many stories like that, where you kind of get that backup and you need it. I also remember seeing, as a side note, to talk about the opposite experience, someone I went to school with back in high school. I saw them post maybe 2 years ago on Facebook. They posted something. Obviously, she knew I was a wedding photographer, but it had nothing to do with me. She said, "Oh yeah, I was at a wedding on the weekend, and there was a female photographer, my friend whose wedding it was, had hired this photographer who was kind of like a bit of an amateur, but was kind of learning the ropes and getting up there. And this photographer in the middle of the ceremony got a phone call from her husband or the babysitter back home saying that, one of the kids was sick or wasn't feeling well or whatever. This photographer literally left the ceremony and went home and spent the rest of the day with the family and basically told the bride and groom, sorry, but my family needs me right now, so I got to go. And left the couple without a photographer for the rest of the day.
Yikes.
So my friend on Facebook was posting this saying, like, to the general public, like, what do you think? Like, is this right? Is this not right? Et cetera, et cetera. And my opinion is that, like, yeah, I mean, emergencies, families come first, but you can't just leave your couple high and dry like that if you don't have a contingency plan. So I think you have to think about those things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've seen it that a few instances here, and I'm part of a few. I was a member of the PPOC for a number of years. I'm not currently, but I certainly formed a lot of really good relationships being part of that organization. And I know that if something were to happen, and I needed to find somebody, that I could lean on some of those connections that I made during that time, and they would, I'm sure, rally, to find somebody, or if they could do it themselves, but if they couldn't, kind of rally support. But I've also seen, just getting to know your community of other photographers and not being an island, right? There's some, I think most photographers are generally pretty social in most cities, right? They'll go out and network and get to know other photographers. But there are cases sometimes if you move or relocate maybe to a new city and you don't know anybody, it takes time to build that network up of other people that you can reach out to or connect with if something like that happens. So we've got a number of different ways of doing that. There's some Facebook groups that I've seen where people will do that if something comes up in it, it's urgent. They can kind of put the call out and see who's available. It's certainly, sometimes it can be difficult because the other photographers might have their own jobs booked, particularly when you get into the summer season, right? It might become, the popular dates like August, for example, here where we live. I know August is always like the most popular, right? So, but there's generally somebody around that could probably, help you out. But an interesting thing was that, so Tim King in his talk at CPC, when this incident happened, it made him realize that he didn't really have something, sort of more formal in place. And so what he did is he had 3 really good friends who were photographers, but sort of semi-retired photographers. They weren't really in the game anymore, but they had the skills and they could jump in and shoot a wedding tomorrow if they needed. And so what he did is he's got a team of 3 guys that he calls them his godfathers, and essentially they have the keys to his business. And so so they kind of know all about his systems. They know, like, okay, if something were to happen to me tomorrow, here's where he keeps all of his bookings. Here's where we can find out his calendar of what he's got coming up for shoots. Here's how we can get, his database of clients. So they have all that, plus they're photographers, so they could step in and actually shoot the job, at least in the short term, and then develop whatever long-term solution if he's, if it was a case where, say, he passed away or had a serious illness and was going to be hospitalized for a long period of time. So he recommended setting up your own team of, of godfathers, so to speak, to be, the ones that could potentially back you up if something were to happen. What do you think of that concept of having, I mean, you kind of have a bit of a godfather in Robert a little bit, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have mixed feelings. I mean, I definitely see where he's coming from on that, and I love it. I guess my only thought is, having multiple people, yes. Are they going to be actively involved in what you're doing? Probably not, because they're no longer in it, and that kind of thing. So I've kind of got mixed feelings about that. I think I like the core message behind it, right? Where it's basically like, make sure you've got a backup plan. Make sure you have that succession plan, or you have a contingency plan if something were to go wrong. But I think really what it comes down to is looking at the bigger picture of it to say, like, do you have something documented? Do you have something written down? Do you have your passwords in one place? Do you have all your systems, your clients, your bookings, your calendars, your invoices, your galleries, everything in an organized way that someone could step in and figure it out? I mean, the worst thing would be for something to happen and then someone comes into your business and they're like, oh my gosh, they've got emails over here, and then I think that they've got a bunch of packages over here that have to be mailed out, but I'm not sure what that is for. Like, there's no organized system for it. Like, something great that I've seen a lot of photographers use that I think is wonderful is something like a workflow chart, right? Like, I've seen people do it with like a whiteboard, for example. I think Design a Glow actually makes a template for it, where basically you list all your clients on the left-hand side, all the sort of workflow steps for a client on the top, and then you just check off each client in each step as you do it. So anyone could come into your business and say, okay, great. This is where every client is at right now. And therefore, this is the next step for each client.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to do. But if you have all that up in your head and don't have that documented anywhere, written anywhere, or organized anywhere, no one's going to be able to come in and just start running your business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it probably all goes back and stems back to how, your own systems and making sure that you've got systems in place, whatever that might be, right? They might be using something like, I don't know, say like a Sprout Studio, perhaps, maybe.
Well, I mean, I wasn't going to go too obvious on the plug. But I mean, certainly, having everything in one place is great, right? But whether you use that or you use ShootQ or you use, whatever it is, right? Just having a system where you organize your business instead of it all being up in your head, I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and getting it down somewhere in some on paper or in a document or something that, and having somebody that knows where that document is as well, because again, it does no good if you have the document, but then nobody can ever find where that document is, right? So it can become a problem. So that's something that I realized is that I need to spend some more time with my wife, getting her up to speed on some of these things as well, because I just there is a lot of it that probably is in my head. I do document a fair amount, but I could do a better job of it. I almost need to sit down and build a manual for the business, right? Like here's how to run the business kind of manual, like a how-to manual.
And again, like I really think that's a great idea, whether or not you're planning on teaching it to somebody or not. Just again, like we said earlier, the process of writing a manual on how to run your business from start to finish, everything involved, every process, every system, it's going to be a lot of work, but it's important work about, working on your business. And I know with 100% certainty that the process of going through that, you will end up finding improvements and being able to optimize things and finding more efficient ways to do things that will make up for the time that you spent to plan this out. So if you spend 40 hours to make this process manual, in doing so, you will find ways to save more than 40 hours, guaranteed.
Yeah. And maybe add it, I would suggest, rather than, because it can be a bit daunting to say, okay, I'm going to sit down and review all my workflow and all my systems. Something I'd suggest, and I'm thinking about, I might do this with our next wedding, is right from the initial stage of, whether it's the inquiry and follow it all the way through, is just start documenting that workflow for one client as you're sort of working along. So it might take you, say, 6 or 8 months or a year even to do it. Right. But you do it in little chunks, like break it into more manageable pieces and say, okay, now what am I doing next for this client? Okay, I'm emailing them about their engagement session. Right. Okay, after I've done that, let me take 5 minutes and go back to my procedures document and document that. So it's front of mind. You're not going back and thinking, now what do I do next after that? You kind of do it as you're actually going through the process, and you might even discover some things there that steps you're missing or steps that you don't need to do.
I have a bit of a mixed thought on that, actually, and I'm just discovering this in my head as we're talking about it. But for me, succession planning is more about how do we make sure things don't fall apart versus how do we keep things going as is. Like if something were to happen to me and I were to be hospitalized and it was horrible, I wouldn't expect that like we'd still have an engagement session for every one of my couples, like this week, right? Or so I wouldn't expect that they'd still get the Starbucks card mailed to them. It's like, but I would not expect for them to like not get their images or not get the album that had been ordered for them already, or to finish up the album or things like that.
Right.
So I feel like there's a bit of a difference in planning to sort of maintain the same level of customer experience that you're used to giving people versus planning so that if something horrible were to happen, shit wouldn't hit the fan type of thing.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because it could be just a temporary thing where you just need to keep the business chugging along until you're able to get back in there and drive again. But there could be, like you say, the alternative, which is obviously the kind of the extreme case scenario, is where, basically it might be the end of the business if something dire were to happen to the owner, right?
Right.
Like I can't see if something were to happen to me tomorrow and I was no longer around, I don't see the business probably continuing.
Right.
Most likely, right? For the most part, I am the business.
Right.
So how do you deal with those weddings that are booked for the next year, right? That you're obviously not going to be able to shoot, right?
So it's kind of like, it's the difference of someone being able to come in, pick up the pieces, see where things are at, and then email the bride for next year and say, hey, just letting you know, here's what's happened, here's what's going on, here's what we're doing, we'll keep you updated, right? So it's like succession planning for me is more like that, at least for photographers, right? I mean, the idea of succession planning comes from like bigger businesses and corporations where they try and get their employees to a point where they could be reliable on things that other people are currently reliable on. But I feel like for most wedding photographers, succession planning is less that, because again, if I were to pass away tomorrow, my business probably is not going to continue running, right? I mean, we're going to make sure everyone's serviced and, deposits get refunded, things like that. But like, we're not going to have a new Brian that comes in and shoots all the weddings for next year. Probably not how I would plan it anyways. So it's like the difference of someone being able to come in, pick up the pieces, settle down things, calm the storm, and make sure everything sort of gets overseen with proper care, versus someone coming in and just basically picking up the business as if nothing ever happened.
Right.
So I think that's where sort of having that. Now, with that, we both just said something important about like, well, what happens about, we're wedding photographers. This is This Week in Weddings. What about weddings that we're photographing next year? If that were to happen, all those deposits that we would have collected for those weddings next year should technically be refunded.
Yes. Yeah.
Based on all that. Now, that's a very important lesson, I think, for photographers to ponder regarding deposits and financial planning. Typically, whenever we receive deposits for a wedding, we should not be spending that money. That money should be technically sitting aside, because that money is actually a liability. That money is not income that we've earned or gained. That's a liability. So, sort of them saying, here's a $1,500 deposit for me to hold that date for you in the future.
Right.
But if we don't have that date held for them anymore because something happens, that money gets to go back to them.
Yeah.
So I think we just have to be careful with that, because I can imagine a lot of photographers finding themselves in a position where if they had to refund $30,000 worth of deposits for next year's weddings, they might find themselves in a bit of a sticky situation where they're having to go into debt to cover that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, absolutely. And that would be something. And if, again, in the case of something really dire happening to you, that could be, a debt that somebody else now has to deal with. And it could become a burden to somebody else, right? Yeah. So you don't want to end up leaving that behind for other people to, to have to clean up and deal with. Right. What about wills? Have you, probably, again, a lot of photographers, probably it's not something that they've thought about. What about that aspect? And if, they're with their business and those kinds of things?
I mean, from a legal standpoint, I don't really know if, again, this is just my personal opinion. I'm sure some of the businesses that, we've got many users, for example, that use Sprout. And I know there's a lot of photographers in the US that, run these big businesses with multiple photographers, and they've got storefronts and things like that. I would say that kind of situation would probably warrant more of the legal side of things in terms of a will. But for my business, again, Brian Capricci Photography, it's me and my studio manager. If something were to happen in terms of my will, the business isn't going to go on. There's not really any assets to sell. I mean, other than obviously the camera equipment, various things like that, but that would just be assumed to go to my successor, which would be my wife. Right. So I don't know how much sense. Again, we could have a lawyer on the podcast that would argue with me on that, and I could be totally wrong. But I think for most sort of one-man shows or 1 to 2 man shows, I don't know if going to the length of having it in a will really makes sense. But what's your opinion on it?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it depends a little bit on your situation. It might differ if you have like an incorporated business. Perhaps there might be some. Again, this would be something where we are not lawyers, so we can't dispense legal advice. Of
course, yeah.
But even just having a will, I think is an important thing to have. We keep saying we're going to go get them written, and we just haven't gotten around to doing it. And then something happens, you hear of things happening to people, and then you realize kind of the importance of it. Because even if you're married, you just sort of logically assume like, okay, well, if I passed away tomorrow, things would go to my wife. But that isn't necessarily always the case. You know,
Mhm.
stuff can then get held up. If there
Right.
isn't a will in place, assets can get held up, sometimes for, you know, a long period of time. And so if things like deposits have to get returned, if something happened to me and we were unable to continue to shoot the weddings, you know, that there could be a whole bunch of just more of a mess for the people. It's not so much for you, or, you know, if you passed away, well, you passed away. It's off your shoulders at that point. It's more of the burden to those that are left behind, right? So you want to try to make it as simple and clean for those that would be left behind in the event that something like that happened as well, right? So I think just having something in place like a will would probably help more so than not having one, I would assume. So
yeah, for sure.
But it gets you thinking about it, right? And you have to decide for yourself. And everybody's situation is different. And but I know it's definitely something that we keep intending to go and get done, and we keep putting it off because it's not, you know, it's not something you want to think about, but you have to think about it, right? Anything can happen. The school that I teach at here, unfortunately the owner passed away, and he only had about 2.5 weeks. At least he had 2.5 weeks to sort of get his affairs in order, but he was feeling fine, started to have some stomach issues, went to the hospital, and 2 days later they diagnosed him with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and 2.5 weeks later he was gone. And he, same thing, like with his business, he ran the business for the most part with his wife supporting, but she didn't know all the pieces to the business. So, again, she had to call on some other people to step in and help her out on some of the back end, the technical stuff, right? But so it's situations like that that'll happen in life that you realize that, anything could happen tomorrow or today. You never like to think about it. It's kind of a morbid thing to think about, but it can happen. So you want to make sure that you're planning for it in some way. You raised an interesting point about passwords and things like that. So the digital, my pick of the week is going to be sort of related to this, but a lot of our stuff lives in the digital world, right? We've got sites all over the place. We might have systems, we might have email, we might have spreadsheets, we might have different social media accounts, things like that. Do you have a way of managing that, or do you have somebody that knows how to get into all that stuff if something were to happen to you and you weren't able to?
I have sticky notes all around. No, I'm kidding. No, I don't. I use an app called Dashlane, actually.
Okay.
Love Dashlane. I've gone through a couple of them. I've tried one called LastPass. I've tried one called 1Password. And I've really settled on Dashlane now. I've been using it for a couple of years, and I love it. Basically, what happens is you have like one master password, and then once you get into the master password, Dashlane basically has everything else. And in Dashlane, not only do I have all of my passwords, my logins, all that kind of thing, but I also have all my credit cards, my social insurance number, all my addresses, all my phone numbers, all different kinds of things like that. So it actually acts, because there's a plugin for like Google Chrome and Firefox and all that, it acts as an autofill. So basically, whenever I go to any website in Google Chrome, Dashlane just picks up and says, hey, want to log in as this? I click yes, and go, it logs me in. So anyone that goes on any of my computers, my iPad, my iPhone, anything, as long as they've put that master password into Dashlane, it will log them into any piece of software they need to get into on my computer.
Nice. And I'm assuming that like somebody like your wife or whatever knows that master password, so you have a backup in case. Because we ran into that when my brother-in-law passed away, and it was sort of like, well, do we know how to access his, because there's different things. Like I think about it, we've got a bunch of things connected to credit cards, auto payments and things like that are connected to credit cards. And you think about that, and it's like, oh yeah, we got that recurring, Adobe software renewal that comes up every year, or and all these things are linked, and you need logins and passwords to get in and all that stuff to change or modify it. So much of that digital, asset management is important, as well.
Well, I think even with that though, you just mentioned something about just like sort of knowing what's going on. And I guess this could be part of the whole writing a process manual, but I know that what we do in our business is I actually have a spreadsheet of like, here's all the expenses, where they come out of, and how much the expense is, just so that I mean, it's good for me to sort of see like, holy cow, that's where my money's going, but also for anyone to sort of jump into the spreadsheet and just say, okay, so like they've got this coming off of this card, the insurance comes out of this account on this day of the month, this is paid annually, this is this is that. And it just gives them a bit of an overview to say, this is what's happening in terms of finances with their business.
Yeah, I've done that as well, and I've got a spreadsheet that lays it all out again, because a lot of the stuff, it's just automated, right? You set it once, and then it kind of, you forget about it after that point, right? So going through that process and auditing that process, I had to do that when one of our credit cards got compromised, and people were trying to buy, shoes from Foot Locker in New York or something like that. So they had to cancel the card. So then I had to go back through and figure out, well, where else was I using this card that I had to go in now and update the credit card number. And I realized that there was probably about 20 different services that I had to go back in and update that credit card number. So that was a little bit of a pain in the butt. So yeah, I haven't heard of Dashlane before. I'll have to check it out. I've been using LastPass.
Okay.
And it works really, really well. And they added a new feature recently with their most recent update. And you can assign somebody to be like a representative on your account. And so what happens is, so say I appointed my wife to be the representative. What she can do is she can then request access to my LastPass account. And if I don't approve it within 2 or 3 days, it automatically will grant her access to it. So it assumes that something has happened to me, that I can no longer access it, and then it gives her. But I would get a notification. Right. And I can cut her out. I can say, no, I don't want her to access it. But if I didn't respond to it, and I think it's within 2 or 3 days, then she would be granted full access to it. So there's ways you can set up people that are sort of, I don't think of the term they would be, but like not a representative, but kind of like a successor. Yeah. So they could then access. So in the case of something happened to me, and again, if she needed to get to these websites, I could set her up as an authorized user on the account, and then she could request access, and then boom, away she goes. So that was kind of a cool feature that they added a little while ago. So
that's great. Something else just spawned for me, just in talking about having a list of sort of the credit card bills and all those things that are happening, where the finances are. Something else that may not be a bad idea is to sort of somewhere document who all your vendors are, what the products are that you typically order, and then like contact information, right? Like to say, because then if someone were to come in and needed to sort of order an album or order a print or call in, cancel something or whatever, having a list to say, okay, Vision Art is, and I order the photo book, this is the phone number for Vision Art. Fineo, I order the Fineo one, this is the size, this is their phone number. Crystal Clear Prints Canada.com if they need to order new sleeves for something, just having a list of all of your vendors, your suppliers, just again, probably would help you organize your business a bit better, so you're not having to go search for things later. But also just kind of gives that really good snapshot if someone had to come in to sort of say what's going on with their business. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, vendors. And then obviously if you have employees, there's, there'll be things there to consider as well. Like in your case, you've got a studio manager, but if you had other employees, or if you had associate photographers, working in the business, how does that work? Who are they? What's the arrangement with them? So are all those systems documented, so that if, again, you're out of the picture for a little while, could somebody step in and know that, oh yeah, okay, this associate photographer is shooting this wedding. Here's how here's the workflow for that particular scenario, right? So you have to look at your business and really kind of do a high level kind of analysis of all the steps and all the moving parts and all the moving pieces.
Geez, running a photography business is so easy, huh?
It's so easy. All you need is just a nice camera.
But these are the things that you really have to consider and think about.
Yeah, and it's the day-to-day stuff that you probably don't think about because again, it becomes autopilot, right? It's just stuff that you do kind of almost by routine. So,
well, and something else, I don't know if you were going to ask this or not, but I know it's in the notes to sort of have a potential discussion about. But what happens if something were to happen to you and you were out of commission for 6 months, right? Well, all of a sudden now the income that you've been making and you've been used to making and that you've budgeted on having that income potentially could completely go away. So what happens then? How do you support your family? If you have to support your family, how do you pay your bills? So having something like a disability insurance or a critical illness insurance or various things like that, even having life insurance in place, if something really horrible were to happen to you, what's going to kind of come in and help those who are your successors to help them manage everything, pay off bills, make do without your income and your business.
Yeah. So, what do you recommend? Like do you have any picks or anything that you'd recommend? I mean, obviously we're here in Canada, so it's going to be different depending where you are in the world. But here in Canada, what you got a health benefits program and package?
I do. Yep. Yeah. So my recommendation, actually, instead of suggesting what I do specifically, because I actually have like 4 different life insurance policies. We've got RRSPs. We've got all different kinds of things like that that are all you can liquidate them in the event that obviously I pass away. But we also have health insurance and critical illness insurance and things like that. But my suggestion would be basically, meet with a financial advisor. And they're going to help you work through it. A financial advisor will be able to sell you life insurance and critical illness insurance and disability insurance and anything like that. Basically, you need to meet with a financial advisor and say, here's my business. Here's my books. Here's the income that I'm used to making. Help me set myself up, not only in the situation that something were to happen really horribly to me, but also in the case that what if I was away and couldn't shoot for 3 months or 6 months or for a year? What if I were to lose my eyesight? What would happen? But then even further than that, this is getting more into financial planning, but we're self-employed entrepreneurs. We don't have the benefit of having a pension plan like most employed people would have by going to work for the school board or something like that. So you should be planning for things like that. For retirement, you should be planning for an education fund if you want to be helping your kids through school if you have kids. So all different kinds of things like that. Those are conversations that you should have with a financial planner so that they can give you a recommendation based on your own circumstances.
Yeah, really get your financial house in order as well too, because that's like you say, it's such an important part, and probably again not something that a lot of photographers probably think about, right? They sort of they're kind of living in the moment, and for a lot, probably the case is they're probably living paycheck to paycheck or deposit to deposit in some cases, right? Where the money comes in for a deposit and it's probably it's not in the bank, it's probably spent for whatever, right? So absolutely, having that sound financial plan is really an important part of running a business. But planning for the future, we're not going to do this forever. I know I don't plan on shooting forever. I'm not planning on giving up anytime soon, but I don't plan on shooting until I'm like 90 either, right? I want to be able to enjoy some retirement. So you do have to start planning for that and start putting aside money for retirement, because like you say, we don't have pensions and these kinds of things that people working for I guess a regular 9-to-5 kind of job for working for somebody else might have.
It's the hardest thing for me. Every fall I have my premiums due for that stuff come out, and it kills me every time to write a check for the amount of money that I'm writing a check for, because in total, I think it ends up being around $15,000 or $20,000 that I'm writing a check for every fall, or multiple checks for various different things. And every time it kills me. I'm just like, oh, I would love to have that money right now, right? But then I look at it and I look at the forecast when I sit down with my financial advisor, and he says that when I'm 50, I can basically retire and still have the kind of income that I'm used to having right now. And I look at that saying, like, that is definitely a very sound business decision and personal decision to sacrifice that money now, because come then I'll appreciate it and be thankful that I did it.
Yeah, you definitely have to put a little bit of that, immediacy and being able to live in the now off a little bit, right? You have to delay some of that, right? Sure. And but we're very much a bit of a now society, right? We want things when we want things, and if we don't have the money, a lot of people go out and borrow money or throw it on a credit card, right? There's this, we got to have it today. We can't save for tomorrow kind of mentality, I find right now, and it's getting people into a lot of problems. I know a lot of friends that don't have any savings, and they're in there, now they're getting into their 30s, late 30s, and they have no savings. They have no retirement savings, and the later in life that they start doing that, it gets harder and harder for them to be able to retire at they might be having to work now till they're 70 or 75. Right. And that's not really, you're not going to get to enjoy your retirement. Right. So.
Right. Well, there's a Chinese proverb that I love what this says, and I may butcher it a little bit, but it says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. So it's like, yes, obviously it would always have been better to have started planning these things and saving for these things in the past, because that's obviously it'll all accumulate. But if you didn't do that, or if you didn't have the foresight, don't use as an excuse to delay anymore. Get on it today and start making a plan for these kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if you say like earmark $50 or $100 from each wedding, and you set that aside into an account that's your retirement account.
Totally.
Not a lot, but do that over the course of 10 or 20 years. Start now.
Yep.
That starts to add up, right? And it starts to be a significant amount, right? So, and then as funds allow, start putting more and more into that, and you'll be glad that you did. So, excellent. Well, hopefully that we planted a few seeds for people to think about, just in terms of not only, like, I think we kind of covered two topics really, kind of short-term not even succession planning, but just short-term taking over the business and crisis management, taking over the business in the event that something happened to you that was a short-term or a temporary thing. But then also thinking about kind of the long end game and succession planning and kind of, what does the future hold us if you were to pass away, or even just, want to retire and, stop shooting weddings. So.
Yeah, I sort of like to look at it as just running a responsible business and planning a responsible business. Those are sort of the things that, although they're not fun and sexy and great, and I'd much rather be out there doing a styled shoot than planning for things like that, it's part of running a smart business and guaranteeing success, sustainability, and longevity.
Yep. So if you're just starting out, if you're a new photographer, you're just starting out, now's a great time to start doing that stuff right now.
Yep.
If you got an established business and you haven't done that yet, now might be a good exercise to sit down and look at really critically analyze your business and really kind of map it out and draw it out and document it. Excellent. All right. Well, if you've got feedback for us or questions or want to share your thoughts on this topic, definitely, Facebook group is a great spot for that, or go to the website and share your comments there. We'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. All right, let's move on then. We've got a listener question this week, and this would be an interesting one. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this topic. I'm sure we may differ on this, but we'll see. So each week we get a listener question to answer on the show, and this week we've got a question from Miroslav Salik. Hopefully I pronounced your name correctly, Miroslav. Miroslav wants to know, do you guys have pricing on your website that is available to everyone? I am developing my website and wondering if I should include such a thing. Brian, what do you think?
Yes. So I'm of the opinion.
Okay. Yeah. Short and sweet. Yes.
I'm of. Come on. When is this ever short and sweet when I answer a question? I'm of the opinion that you do need to put your prices on your website, and I say that with a caveat: not all of your prices, not all the details, and not everything, but at least some kind of indicator to say this is the ballpark.
Okay.
Because I think it acts in a couple of ways. Number one, it's going to weed out anyone that you are completely out of the price range for. For example, if I say that my prices start at $4,000 and someone's got a budget of $1,200, the chances of them end up booking me are very unlikely. And so I want to sort of set that expectation up front that this is what sort of you can expect as a ballpark. I'm not going to waste their time, and I'm not going to waste my time. And sort of stopping that. But it also, again, like sets that expectation where it's like if someone comes in and they've got a budget of $3,500 and they're like, oh, okay, he's around $4,000. The chances of them booking are pretty great, but also the chances of me being able to communicate what I do to them in a way that makes them want to spend more money is also pretty great because they're at least closer to where I'm sitting price-wise. So I think that you have to do it because it helps set expectations. It weeds out anyone that sort of isn't in your range. But also, I think the third part, which is almost most important, if you look at the way, Bruce, you said that we live in the now culture today, which is very true. And the way that consumers use the internet and the way that human behavior is on the web is that if we can't get the information or at least get an indication of the information that we are looking for, we will very likely just leave and go find it somewhere else.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's like I've been on many websites, even just like in looking for an app or looking for a new social media tool or whatever. If they sort of say like, ooh, you must contact us to get pricing information, I'm either thinking they're not confident enough in their product to put it up front. They want to put me through some sales process and try and pitch me and hard sell me, in which I'm not interested in. I just want to know whereabouts I'm looking to spend my money. Like what can I expect? Give me some kind of an idea. Right. So there's been many times where I've been on a website that didn't have the pricing information and I would just move on and not even get in touch because basically I'm saying, hey, if you don't want to put it up front there and you want to make me work, I don't want to work. Yeah. So I'm just going to leave. So yeah, I think you have to put at least your starting prices, and that's what I recommend, and that's what I do in my business. I don't think you should overwhelm with everything because you need to give them a reason to get in touch with you, right? If you put everything, all your options, all your packages and everything on there, I'm of the opinion that they basically have everything they need and there's no reason for them to get in touch with you.
Right. Yeah. See, I'll disagree a tiny little bit and I'll tell you my experience. So I've had both. We started out where we just put the range on, sort of starting at X number. And then about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, when we kind of updated the wedding side of things, I put our packages on there. I listed our 3 packages. I listed what was included, and we've actually booked at least 4 or 5 weddings where when they came to us, they said one of the deciding factors was we didn't have to hunt around for information. You laid it out. It was very clear, and we appreciated that, and it saved us time, and we weren't being, we felt like we weren't being jerked around. We knew very clearly, like, here's what you offered, here's what your packages were, and they still wanted to meet with us because there's still things that they want to be able to see, see the products that we include, see the album that's included. They want to come meet us and get to know our personalities and things like that. So I think it didn't hinder meeting with people. People still wanted to come in and meet with us and see us. But it was nice because they came in already a little bit pre-informed. They kind of had a rough idea of what they wanted. And then we were able to get the conversation going, around like, well, maybe we do need a little bit more coverage, or maybe we do want a little bigger album, or these kinds of things. So we found it's actually been really beneficial to have our packages online. So again, that's been our experience. So it might work for some people. It might not work for others. So, but I think definitely having some pricing information helps. Yeah, like you say, whether it's detailed or not detailed, having something on there, I think definitely is a good idea. So hopefully that will help Miroslav decide what he wants to do.
Sweet.
Excellent. Well, if you have a question, we want to hear from you. So just head on over to thisweekinphoto.com. You can leave your questions there just by clicking the Contact Us button, or you can also email us at twipwed@thisweekinphoto.com. All right, so before we close things off, of course, we've got our picks of the week. And each episode, we will share a photography-related item that we think would be a benefit to wedding photographers. And our picks can be anything as long as they are somehow related to photography or the business of photography. Brian, what have you got for us? Something really topical for today's topic.
Yes, I do. So it's we talked about the idea of documenting what you do in your business, just to have sort of a process guide, a bit of a manual for your business and running it. In the typical techie way, I mean, obviously you could just write that down. You could open up Google Docs and write it there. You could open up TextPad and write it there. But I kind of love the idea of having like nice little cool systems to do things, to make it pretty, to make it easy, to make it more straightforward. Because I think if you reduce friction, it makes it more likely to happen, right? If it's easier to do, if it's nicer to do, if it makes it more enjoyable, you're more likely to do something. So there's an app called Sweet Process, and I've used this in the past, and I love it. And sorry, when I say app, it's a web tool. It's a web, basically, and it allows you to basically document a process, step 1, step 2, step 3, but it does it in a really, really easy, straightforward, beautiful way. You can drag images around, and it's very simple. And then you can basically create, documents that are all of your processes, so it's like, to prepare for a wedding, step 1, I do this, step 2, I do this, step 3, I do this, step 4, I do this. To order an album, step 1, I do this, here's a screenshot of this. Step 2, I do this, here's a video I'm embedding of this. So you can do all different kinds of things like that to create a really simple, straightforward sort of step 1, step 2, step 3 procedure.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm kind of showing their interface here. They're kind of their front page. So it's sweetprocess.com. That's cool. Very cool. Nice. Very good pick. So yeah, that's a great, I'm going to have to look at that because I need to start doing that. So I'm going to look at that tool.
There you go.
How much do you know? Is there a charge for it, or?
I think there's a free account. I don't know what the paid one ends up being.
Let's look at pricing.
Pricing. It's on there.
Startup one.
$29 a month. That's not cheap.
Not insignificant. Yeah. So $30
I guess it just depends on how deep you want to get with it.
Yeah.
I'll give you an alternative for anyone that wants something else. I guess this is like pick of the week version 2.
Yep.
1.2.
Yep.
It's different, but it's somewhat related. It's an app called Screenflow. We use this here in Sprout all the time because we're doing documentation videos and things like that. But Screenflow, basically, you press record and it will record everything on your computer screen. So it's great. I actually did this when I had first hired a VA. In between my last studio manager and my current studio manager, I'd hired a VA to do a whole bunch of things for me, a virtual assistant. And I documented my process through Screenflow. So I basically opened up Screenflow, pressed record, and I just said, hey, okay, I'm going to walk you through how I go and do this task. So first I go here and do this, and then I go here and do this, and then I go here and do this. So it records my voice, it records my face talking, and then it also records the screen that I'm showing it on. So it's a great way to document different processes. And that's more of like a one-time fee of $29, and you download it once and you have it forever. So that's a great process too, to make more in-depth documentation in video form of your processes.
Awesome. Excellent bonus pick. I like it.
There you go.
Very good.
That makes up for Robert. So that one was
There we go.
Yeah, so now we still have 3 picks of the week.
Perfect. Excellent. Sounds good. Well, my pick this week, I kind of mentioned it previously, and it was LastPass. So if you're looking for kind of a password manager or something to put all that stuff into, but they also have a really great article, and we'll link to it in the show notes. Just preparing a digital will for your passwords, and it's it just sort of goes into like who needs it, what sorts of things should you be putting into that, and they had like pieces of information like passwords to your computers, PIN codes or passwords for your tablets or smartphones. What's the PIN code for your voicemail? Right, that might be an important one, right? If something happened to you and somebody needs to go in and check your voice, because there might be an important urgent voicemail from a client. As how does somebody go in and access that? Bank pins, loyalty cards, all that kind of stuff, right? So having all those things, in a document. So this is a really good article. It gets you kind of thinking about having a digital will. So again, link to that in the show notes.
Awesome.
Well, I guess that brings us to the end of another episode of TWiP Weddings. Of course, we want to thank our sponsors for their support, and remind you to send in your questions for the show and share your thoughts by commenting on the blog post for this episode. So, Brian, where can people go if they want to keep up with you? And what have you got coming up, actually?
Yeah, what do I got coming up? So photography education wise, everything I write and do and talk about is over at sproutingphotographer.com. So we've got our podcast that we do twice a week, all about the business of photography. We write educational articles about the business of photography, and we've got some pricing calculators over there as well. So if anyone's interested in going over there and diving into that, sproutingphotographer.com is where I live and breathe. And obviously our parent company here is Sprout Studio, our software. We talked about that in a previous episode. Obviously anyone's interested in that, get sproutstudio.com to help them organize their business. That's pretty much all I got going on. We're just, like I said, I'm sort of back to work now. So this week is like catch up for me to kind of get back after 3 weeks of being away. But yeah, we're just kind of crushing through here with Sprout and doing lots of education. We're coming up to wedding season. So that's coming up as well. I've scaled back my weddings this year just because of everything we got going on with Sprout.
Sure.
But I still have obviously quite a few weddings. So if you want to check out my website and what I do photography wise and some of my photos, it's bcapphoto.com.
Excellent. Very good. Again, we'll link to all those things in the show notes if you're looking for Brian.
Awesome.
And if you are looking for me, again, you can find me over at my website, which is momentsindigital.com. We're coming into wedding season shortly here as well. So there's going to be lots of activity happening on the blog post with engagement sessions. Just finished a couple of styled shoots recently. So that was kind of fun doing some collaboration there during kind of while we're waiting for wedding season to kick off. And then, and then we'll be pedal to the metal and right into it here right away. So looking forward to wedding season. It's kind of getting into high gear here. So excellent. And of course, if you were looking for the show, just visit the website at thisweekinphoto.com. There you can, if you're listening to this on the web, of course, you can also subscribe to it in your favorite podcast catcher. This show and lots of the other great shows that are on the TWiP network. And of course, you can leave your comments there as well. And thanks again for listening to TWiP Weddings, raising the bar one wedding at a time. Da, 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 da.